So, this week for our sacred gathering, we're going to be looking at what's probably a fairly familiar parable for many of us. This is what's usually called the parable of the sower or the parable of the soils. Because of its familiarity, I thought we would maybe have more of a discussion around it than just kind of me talking about it. And I was particularly interested in one kind of fact. Usually, when you run into teachings on this or in the lectionary reading as we got today, people begin with Jesus kind of telling the parable and then they jump right to the interpretation of it that Jesus gives to his disciples. I was struck that between those two, almost always people cut out a middle section in which Jesus talks about the parables and their purpose overall. And I couldn't help but wonder, since the gospel writers are pretty intentional about the way they structure things, the way stories are told and written, what it is this kind of middle section has to do with the story around it. So, as usual, when we're having a discussion, I'm mostly going to kind of read the text for this recording, and I'm going to ask the questions. But of course, the main event is on Sunday when we get to discuss it together. So I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 13. That day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down beside the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he climbed into a boat and sat down. The whole crowd was standing on the shore. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground, where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention. So just kind of a quick note on this section is one of my friends I remember who lived for a while in a rural area where farming was a big deal, was always struck in this parable just how wasteful this farmer seems to be. Seed was expensive in the community he lived in. I'm sure it was even more expensive for kind of borderline starving farmers in Palestine all those years ago, right? And so here we are, a farmer who's just throwing the seed everywhere, who's not being intentional, who's just throwing it and giving the option of growth anywhere it wants. What does that tell us about kind of God's economy, God's view of what effectiveness means compared to maybe how we would think about things? The other question I wanted us to think about is, okay, so what are these seeds? What is it God is trying to grow in us if we are the types of the soil? And then I think maybe what is the kind of quintessential question of this entire section we're going to be looking at? What are the conditions of heart which allow God's blessings, whatever it is God's trying to plant in us, to thrive? Again, what are the conditions of the heart that allow God's blessings to thrive? So then we get this middle section, which many people skip because they want to jump right to the interpretation, but I think is important. So Jesus' disciples came to him and said, "Why do you use parables when you speak to the crowds?" Jesus replied, "Because they haven't received the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but you have. For those who have will receive more, and they will have more than enough. But for those who don't have, even the little they have will be taken away from them. This is why I speak to the crowds in parables. Although they see, they don't really see. And although they hear, they don't really hear or understand. What Isaiah prophesied about them has become completely true. You will hear to be sure, but never understand. You will certainly see, but never recognize what you're seeing. For this people's senses have become calloused. They've become hard of hearing. They've shut their eyes, so that they won't see with their eyes, or hear with their ears, or understand with their minds, or change their hearts and lives, that I would heal them. Happy are your eyes because they see. Happy are your ears because they hear. I assure you that many prophets and righteous people wanted to see what you hear and hear what you hear, but they didn't. So, why is Jesus obscuring kingdom truths through these parables? What is it that Jesus describes to them? And why is the interpretation saved only for the disciples and, of course, through them for us? So then, after this kind of mysterious section so easily skipped over, we do get the interpretation. Consider then the parable of the farmer. Whenever people hear the word about the kingdom and don't understand it, the evil one comes and carries off what was planted in their hearts. This is the seed that was sown on the path. As for the seed that was spread on rocky ground, this refers to people who hear the word and immediately receive it joyfully. Because they have no roots, they last for only a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke the word, and it bears no fruit. As for what was planted on good soil, this refers to those who hear and understand and bear much fruit and produce. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1, in another case, a yield of 60 to 1, in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. So the questions I want to say is let's look at these types of soil. What do they tell us about kind of the conditions of a heart and how we often receive what it is God is trying to teach us, give us, bless us with, etc., right? So where do you see these types of soil in the world around us? What sort of people are being described? But as always, with many of Jesus' teachings, I think we need to ask the question of ourselves as well. At what times and in what ways are we each of these different types of soils? In what ways are we not receiving what God has for us? All things that we would, turn and criticize in the world, I think we always need to be able to start with our own hearts. And so, like the disciples, we are gifted this interpretation. And so the question again is, what are the conditions of the heart that allow God's blessings to thrive? And maybe what else are we finding in our own hearts? So I'm looking forward to having this discussion with everyone on Sunday.